The Fall of Eternity. Act 2. No. Pyrite dropped his glaive. His heart pounded in his ears, and he ran to one of the tall windows that flanked the keep's large, dark wood doors. Through the glass, he saw the steps that wound down the mountain. Even despite the physical barrier before him, he could hear the cries and explosions coming from the bridge below. The bridge, where his friends were dying without him. Oz! Oz, please! He pleaded as baseless hope held on. Pushing all reason aside, he watched and waited, hoping Osgaroth's croaking voice would intrude on his thoughts once more, to tell him that they had won, or escaped, or anything. But no voice came. Suddenly, a colossal explosion erupted from the bridge, and Pyrite knew. And he screamed. He slammed his fist onto the windowsill, crushing the stone to dust and sending a crack splintering through the glass. His cries echoed through the empty halls, until finally, he fell quiet and hung his head.
Protect the Matriarch.
Osgaroth's order echoed in his mind. Pyrite looked up, his eyes fuming. He knew the Spellweaver was right, and he would not let their sacrifice be in vain. He pushed off the sill, and the keep shook violently as a crash echoed through the walls. Dust fell from the high ceiling as 4 more cannonballs followed the first, pounding the walls of the keep. Pyrite heard a shrill screech and watched as stone-covered creatures slammed down just in front of the window. The last line of gargoyles, no doubt animated by the cannon fire, roared out their fury and took off down the steps. Pyrite gave a wistful smile as he turned to do that which Osgaroth, Anid, and Dadan had entrusted him with. Pyrite grabbed his glaive from the floor and looked at the room around him. It was a disaster. Random papers covered in magical theory littered the marble floor. Bookshelves, overturned by the cannon shocks, lay with their books spilled like the blood of the fallen warriors outside. He pushed the thought out of his mind and set off down the Hall of Eternal Glory. As he ran, he passed the many portraits and statues that sat enshrined within recesses along the walls. Matriarchs, patriarchs, spellweavers, the whole lineage of this place and its noble denizens, and it was going to be destroyed. The thought filled him with fury, which he appreciated as it drowned out the grief. Finally, he reached the end of the hall, where, beyond a set of large doors, lay the room he was looking for, the astral atrium. Just before he entered the room, a bright white flash shone from around the doors and dissipated just as fast. Pyrite slid past the doors, his eyes adjusting to the dim blue of the towering room. The astral atrium was the centermost point of the keep and served as both Grand Hall and Nexus. Where most atriums had a grand skylight as their roof, the astral atrium had no such skylight. Instead, its large domed ceiling displayed an accurate, magical projection of the cosmos. The ancient demons, those of the Spellweaver Council, stood around a large ritual circle in the form of an 8-pointed star. The embroidered robes they wore sparkled as the light from the star fizzled out. The demon on the far side of the room, Tomak, noticed Pyrite and regarded him.
Pyrite? How fares the defense?
Another, the one known as Ulvan, turned and asked,
Have the invaders been repelled?
Pyrite's grip on his glaive tightened as he fought to maintain his composure. He had failed, and now he had to tell the council. Pyrite, his voice shaking, said, They've broken through. I'm the only survivor. There's not much time. Gasps echoed through the room.
Coward! You ran?
Roared Ugrath from his place on the right side of the circle. Pyrite's glaive cracked in his grip as his anger flared, but the Spellweaver carried on.
It was foolish to trust the defense to a barbarian like you. A failure, like you've always—
That's enough,
bellowed Zagil, the eldest member of the council, from his place beside Ugrath.
You are acting a newborn, Ugrath.
The old demon calmed his raging eyes and looked at Pyrite.
What happened?
Pyrite peeled his glare away from Ugrath and returned Zagil's gaze. Segrid himself is leading the invasion. We held as best we could. We were going to destroy the bridge to halt their advance, but cannon fire from House Pervectus cannons destroyed the behemoth before it could do so. Osgaroth teleported me here to ensure the Matriarch's safety.
Osgaroth has fallen?
Ulvan asked, more to herself than Pyrite.
House Provectus has allied with House Imperiosus?
Demanded Solmar from the left side of the circle. I don't know. All I know is Segrid has their cannons, Pyrite replied. Zagil stroked his beard.
Segrid himself.
Is the evacuation concluded?
Yes, we just teleported the last group to House Neveus lands. They are honoring the agreement. Our house will endure,
Explained Tolmach. A dissatisfied grunt came from Groth, who muttered,
We wouldn't have had to run it all had this useless cur not failed.
A blast of pure magical energy slammed into the side of Ugroth, and he fell to the floor.
The fault of this falls not on Pyrrhus.
Zagil glared down at the groaning spellweaver, the crystal embedded at the top of his staff still glowing.
Were it not for him, House Neveus would never have agreed to shelter us in the first place. Sargal's betrayal is to blame.
Though he was grateful for Zagil's intervention, they had no time. So the Matriarch has been evacuated, Pyrite pressed. The spellweavers exchanged concerned looks. Pyrite knew what that meant. Where is she? Ulvan took a step toward Pyrite.
We tried to persuade her.
Pyrite's eyes grew wide as the spellweaver explained.
She's convinced she can complete the summoning. You know how stubborn she—
Where is she? Pyrite interrupted. His voice was cold, each word drawn out as he restated his question. The spellweaver looked down.
The Tower of Kulvath.
Suddenly, the entire keep shuddered as an explosive crack rang through the hall behind Pyrite. As the ringing echo died away, it was replaced with the shouts of marauding demons. He looked at each of the spellweavers. They're here. Get yourselves to safety. I'll get her out. Somehow. Without another word, he ran past the spellweavers and headed for the far door that led deeper into the keep.
Pyrrhus,
Called Zagil. Pyrite stopped and looked back. The spellweaver tossed a shining crystal to him.
good luck.
Pyrite looked at the crystal for a moment, surprised, then nodded and took off down the hall. Zagil watched the young demon go and let out a long sigh. He turned and looked at the other council members. They patiently awaited his word.
Ugrath, destroy the bridge to the eastern wing. Agiol, you destroy the western bridge,
Zagil said. Agiol gave a solemn nod, while Ugrath, back on his feet, stared at him, a look of both horror and shame upon his face.
So it has come to this, that we must destroy our own home?
Zagil returned his gaze.
So it has. The least we can do is prevent our foe from accessing all of our secrets.
Perpetuum Keep was divided into 4 sections, each separated by the chasms between the mountains they rested upon. When the castle was being built, space atop the mountain quickly ran out, and so bridges were built to connect the main keep to the small peaks surrounding it. The central keep, where they were now, made up the bulk of the castle. The western keep consisted of multiple dormitories for the many casters who had once resided within these ancient walls. The eastern keep housed many of the magical laboratories and classrooms where those casters learned their craft. And the northern villa housed the spellweavers and matriarch or patriarch. But more importantly, within the eastern and western keeps lay the entrances to the crypts that run deep beneath the mountains.
Once the bridges are destroyed, activate the anti-teleportation fields around the crypts. We can at least spare our honored dead from Sargal's greed. Once that is done, teleport to House Neveus lands. The rest of you, go now.
Zagil could hear the approaching demons from the hall. Without another word, the remaining members of the Spellweaver Council teleported away, white light flashing one by one as they retreated from the atrium. Agiol and Ugrath teleported to complete their respective tasks, while Ronad, Tolmach, Volgon, and Solmar all teleported to the relative safety of House Neveus. When the final flashes concluded, only Zagil and Ulvan remained.
And what about you, Zagil? You left yourself out.
Ulvan asked, concern in her voice. Zagil sighed once more.
Ulvan.
She walked over to him, her voice urgent.
We will need your guidance now more than ever.
Ulvan, enough.
Zagil said, and Ulvan stopped.
Pyrrhus will need time to get the Matriarch out. He won't be able to do that with these marauders right behind him.
Zagil glanced at the door behind him. The invaders were even closer, the steady march of the boots now echoing into the atrium. Ulvan crossed the room and stood beside him. Her voice was gentle.
We both know that's not really why.
I cannot do it again. I will not run away a second time. It will fall to the rest of you to reclaim our lands. But I will not abandon our home. Not again.
He saw understanding in his granddaughter's eyes and smiled.
Besides, my dear Ulvan, someone has to greet our guests.
Ulvan's eyes grew cloudy.
You old fool.
She groaned.
Go, my dear.
With that, Ulvan vanished in an outcry of bright light. Zagil took a deep breath and walked to the center of the atrium. With crooked staff in hand, he pulled his hood over his head and waited. As he did, he looked at the astral projection high above him, the display he had built. How fond of it he was. He had spent centuries completing it, making sure each star burned in the correct spot. How proud he had been when he had completed it. He had never expected it would be his tomb. He let out a dry laugh.
Who could ask for a better mausoleum?
The atrium doors swung open, and the invaders marched in. At the head walked Lord Sigrid Imperiosus, with 3 honor guard at his side. Zagil looked up from beneath his hood.
It has been a long time since House Perpetuum received guests within these walls. Longer still since I was the one to greet them.
Sigrid met his glare.
Zagil, the Void Spinner.
His forces lined up behind him, blades drawn and shields before them.
Do you wish to surrender? I could use someone of your capabilities.
Zagil gave a hoarse laugh.
Is that how you convince Sargal?
Sigrid glanced at the astral projection up above.
I imagine the riches helped, but no. It was the recognition of his abilities that convinced him. Yes, well, he always was the egotist.
Zagil cradled his staff under his arm and clapped his hands together dramatically.
You two must get along swimmingly.
Sigrid's eyes snapped back to the ancient demon, his brow furrowing.
Join me, Spellweaver, and you can have back that glory and prestige your house so misses. Or you can resist and die.
Zagil ignored the threat and continued, his voice dripping with contempt.
Oh, I will not be joining you. But tell me, Lord, when the dust settles, what will you have gained from this invasion? You spent all these lives on what? One single keep and a sliver of territory?
Sigrid's scowl deepened.
You know exactly why I'm here. Did you think you would get away with it without anyone noticing? The Hellbeast of Perpetuum will never be allowed to return. Your house will never return. House Imperiosus is the true power now.
Zagil let out a hearty laugh.
Lord Sigrid, is that fear I hear? Are you afraid of what we will do once the Hellbeast returns?
Zagil's eyes burned with ancient fury.
You should be.
Sigrid cut him off.
We destroyed your pathetic house once before, broke your grip on power, and left you a bleeding corpse.
The Lord took a breath and composed himself.
And now, history repeats itself.
Zagil's contemptuous smile faded, and he glared at the invader, the fury of House Perpetuum clear on his ancient features.
Do not dare to speak to me of history, child of Imperiosus. I was there when the Demon King betrayed us. I was there when your house and all the others turned your talons upon us like the vultures you are. You think history is repeating itself? I promise you it is.
Sigrid scoffed and waved a hand dismissively. Yes, you're going to proclaim that House Perpetuum will rise from the squalor we left you in and reclaim your eternal glory? Your house is naught but dirt and ash, a footnote in the texts. What hope do you have? We are without number. At his word, the legion of demons at his back raised their swords and marched forward, passing their lord and bearing down on the lone spellweaver. Zagiel, spellweaver of House Perpetuum, and the one known as the Void Spinner, glared at his approaching foe.
And I am without mercy.
His red eyes flashed to pure black, and his staff dissolved in his hand. He reached out with his mind to the place between dimensions. His hands gripped the space before him, and, without even a word, reality tore open. Void energy shot out as a beam and smashed into the oncoming lines. The first 3 ranks of legionaries dissolved on impact. The next rank stepped over the barely recognizable remnants of their comrades. Zagiel opened another 2 rifts in the air before him, and the black energy shot forth, burning into the flanks of the approaching shield wall. The spellweaver held out his hands and, grunting with effort, pulled them inward, willing the portals to follow. The 2 beams sliced in like shears, bisecting the lines of demons as the blades of dark energy closed in towards Segrid. Shields bearing gold and green colors slammed down around the Lord. The void energy dispelled on contact, sending a wave of violent feedback into Zagiel's outstretched arms. The spellweaver let out a surprised gasp and was sent back, falling to one knee. Before him, a new group of legionaries lined up, spanning the entire width of the circular room. They were different from those before. Each one wielded a throwing spear, and their gold and green shields were lined with inlaid carvings. Their very presence clouded Zagiel's mind, filled his mind's eye, which viewed the battlefield from above, with static. Segrid looked to one of the demons who had shielded him, the flaming crest of Nightmare Mane atop his helm marking his station.
Centurion Rannick, bring me his head.
The Centurion nodded and walked to the front of his formation. Behind him stood the signifier. The tall standard in his hand displayed a great horned beast and glowed with magical energy. The Centurion raised his spear and cried,
"First century! Forward!"
An officer at the back of the wide formation echoed the order, and the legionaries marched forward as one. Zagiel stood, opened a new rift, and let it go to prevent the inevitable feedback from hitting him a second time. The void energy spewed out toward the Centurion.
Shields!
The Centurion shouted and raised his shield along with the rest of the front 3 ranks. The instant the beam hit the shields, it collapsed, sending feedback into the rift and closing it. The anti-magic runes inlaid into the dark wood shields glowed with power. Zagiel, untouched by the spell's collapse, scowled.
Runes. Fine. Then how about this?
Reaching forward, Zagiel poured magical power into the space before him, and it began to glow with dark energy. The Void Spinner weaved his hands around the black orb, like a spider spinning silk. It grew larger as he suffused it with more and more power. The room around him flared, the blue glow of the astral gallery growing bright as it empowered him and allowed him to pierce the veil of anti-magic that interfered with his mind. The orb of magical energy began to twitch and warp in his arcane grip, and he released it. It shot out, splitting in 2 and halting high in the air between the opposing forces, and then opened. From the darkness, long, skeletal hands emerged, reaching out and gripping the edges of the tears in reality. Kotos and Dracaina, the twin Void Titans, pulled themselves free from the void. Starlight exploded out as they landed on the atrium floor, blasting both Zagiel and the invaders back. The Titans' bodies were long, chitinous forms, like that of centipedes made of solidified darkness, with rows of skeletal arms and hands as legs. Their heads were gigantic skulls that twitched and rotated unnaturally as they looked at the prey they towered over. Zagiel steadied himself and reached out with his mind. The Titans felt his intrusion, and their heads twisted around and locked eyes with him. The ancient demon flared with power as he took hold of the great Titans. The 2 monstrosities of the void groaned and clawed at their heads as Zagiel imprinted his will upon them. The pair unleashed a telepathic scream directly into Zagil's mind, and he recoiled, barely staying upright. Despite the Titan's struggle, however, Zagil maintained his focus, and, at last, the pair stopped writhing and turned to face the invaders. Kotos gave a terrible, screeching cry that shook the entire keep, and together, they launched forward, taloned forelimbs extended and grasping. The first two ranks of demons locked their shields together, forming a solid sheet of protection. From his place behind the Centurion, the signifier raised his standard, and it shone with power. In the next moment, a wall of golden light projected before the shields. The two titans slammed into the warded formation with a thunderous crash and recoiled back, screeching in pain and fury. The demons before them were unharmed, and before the twins could recover, the row behind the shield wall threw their spears. The weapons flew into the beasts, most deflected off the great chitin plates that covered them, but a few found their marks and plunged into the dark flesh. Kotos swiped viciously at the ward. Each time his talons ripped small tears into the wall of light. Dracaena coiled back, opened her massive mouth, and let loose a blast of void energy. It exploded against the wall, shaking the keep and showering starlight over the legionaries. The blast had opened only a small hole, but Kotos lunged forward, grabbed the slowly closing edges, and pulled the barrier open. Dracaena took the opportunity her twin had provided and crawled in. The great beast landed in the midst of the formation, crushing armored demons beneath it. Those legionaries surrounding her charged and began hacking at her limbs. She swiped at them with her many clawed hands, twisting to hit as many as possible. The anti-magic shields wielded by the demons were useless as Dracaena tore through them. Kotos tried to follow his twin in, but the barrier slipped from his grasp and closed. The beast screamed as he watched his twin fight without him. He reached back and slammed his forelimbs against the barrier over and over. The formation of demons split into two groups, those spearing Kotos outside the barrier and those fighting Dracaena within. The front ranks, led by Centurion Ronak, ignored the fierce fighting behind them and began to wrap around Kotos, bending into a crescent moon shape. Zagil's hands danced, and four unstable rifts opened around the signifier. The legionaries beside the signifier slammed their shields into the portals, forcing them shut. The Spellweaver cursed their reaction time. He had barely been able to open the portals within the anti-magic interference in the first place. He needed that signifier taken care of. Kotos was covered in throwing spears that had found gaps in his armor, and Dracaena was already bleeding heavily from the many wounds that scored her limbs. The latter let loose a blast of void energy, but it dissolved against the shields. Zagil knew these creatures were tough, but these legionaries were doing far more damage than expected. Suddenly, 3 throwing spears shot towards Zagil. He waved his hand and the weapons vanished, reappearing behind the large formation and spearing 3 unwitting legionaries through the back. Were it not for the anti-magic interference, he would have simply sent them into the signifier, or perhaps Sigurd himself. A thought occurred to Zagil, and he opened a small rift and sent a blast of concentrated magical energy into the barrier. The blast exploded in a shower of sparks.
It's not anti-magic.
Zagil cast his mind's eye to a different region of the void. He swiped his hands before him, and the air far above the battle rippled. He reached out, took hold of the fabric of the universe, and ripped it apart. Green energy poured from the great tear and shot down toward the battle below. It cast the room in a sickly glow. The signifier saw this and raised the standard above him, spreading the barrier over the top of the now 2 formations. Zagil smiled. The barrier shattered on impact, the null beam sapping it of all energy before dissipating. Kotos exploded forward, leaped over the formation that encircled him, and shot straight toward the signifier. His talons skittered and tapped furiously on the stone floor as he closed in on his target. The signifier tried to bring the standard back down, to recast the ward, but before he could, he was separated from his legs with one snap of Kotos' sawtoothed jaws. The legionaries around the late signifier were sent flying by the Titan, as it carried on toward its embattled twin. Before Kotos broke free of the formation, Centurion Ronak threw his spear, and it gave a sonic crack, ripping through the air and pinning the rearmost segment of Kotos into the brick. The beast reared up and roared, coiling around his pinned tail and slamming his enormous fist down on the Centurion. Ronak sidestepped the crashing blow and grabbed hold. He pierced his sword into the bony forelimb and hauled himself on. Kotos tried to shake the demon off, but the Centurion held his grip, his flaming crest rippling violently. As the limb leveled out for an instant, the Centurion left his sword behind and was gone, charging toward the segmented body. Kotos tried to twist his arms around, to slap at the demon sprinting toward his head, but the legionaries surrounding him had grabbed onto his limbs and, by sheer force of numbers, held them in place. Twisting his head unnaturally, the Titan opened his still bloody jaw and shot a barrage of void energy toward Ronak. The first blast the demon sidestepped, the second dissolved on his raised shield. As the Centurion reached Kotos' head, a spear flew through the air before him. Ronak grabbed it and, skidding across the chitin, reached back and launched it straight into the closing mouth of the Void Titan. The spear ripped into the flesh within the gaping maw and through the bone on the other side, severing its spine. The beast recoiled, his limbs spazzing and twitching as nerves misfired. Finally, he collapsed, dead. Centurion Ronak nodded to the legionary below who had thrown him the spear. Zagil watched in stunned horror. He tried to will himself to cast something, to do anything, but his concentration was momentarily shattered, his mind no longer cast to the void. An ear-splitting cry shook the very mountain. Pillars upon which the roof of the atrium sat quaked as Drachyna dove for her fallen twin. She was on the Centurion in an instant, smacking him aside and looking down at her motionless sibling. She reached out with a cracked and bloodied forelimb and nudged Kotos. When he didn't rise, she let out a long, mournful wail and, grasping her twin's lifeless head, opened her jaw and bit down into it. The entire room froze, processing what they witnessed. On and on the Titan ate, consuming the remains of her twin without hesitation. She snapped bones, cracked chitin, and drank void black blood. The grotesque sounds echoed through the atrium. Even Segrid seemed stunned. Zagil himself didn't know what the Titan was doing, nor why it was doing it.
I didn't know they did that,
he whispered. Centurion Ronak started shouting orders to his legionaries and charged toward the remaining Titan. In the next moment, he was struggling from within her enormous hand. She had moved so fast, it had taken Zagil a moment to notice. The Centurion struggled in the Titan's grip, but she ignored him and continued eating. After Drachyna had devoured half of her late twin's body, she reared up and began to twitch. Her chitinous form started to shift and change. Her skull elongated, and multiple sets of glowing eyes formed in place of the original two. Limbs joined together at the bottom half of her body, shifting into a large round form. And 8 long, chitin-plated legs sprouted and planted into the ground. Zagil realized what was happening. This wasn't just an act of twisted void spawn cannibalism. It was an evolution, an apotheosis. The great Titan, with the torso of a 6-armed demon and the body of a greater arachnid, looked at the struggling demon within her grasp. And that was when the many rows of sword-length teeth parted, and she spoke.
Insects,
the creature said. Its voice reverberated throughout the atrium and within the minds of every being in attendance. She reached down and rested a hand on her mutilated twin. Kotos began to morph, folding in on his remains until he resembled an enormous skeletal scythe. She picked it up and slammed the end into the brick, sending cracks spidering out.
I am Drachyna, Warden of the Great Vastness, Keeper of the Deep Void, and I will be your death.
She clenched her fist and crushed Centurion Ronak, sending out a shower of viscera. Then, hands still dripping, she gripped her scythe and launched forward. Zagil watched as Drachyna bisected an entire row of charging legionaries with one swing of her scythe. He no longer had control of the monster before him. He had felt her rip free of his control when she spoke. So far, it didn't seem to be a problem, and he wasn't going to risk trying to take back control of the Titan. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes, recentering his mind. He tried to view the battle through his mind's eye, tried to get a bird's eye view of things. Yet still, his view was full of interference. The anti-magic runes on the shields of the legionaries and the armor of Segred and his honor guard still blocked his sight. But rather than the opaque blanket it had been at the start of the battle, it was now more of a translucent sheet.
The runes are reaching their limits.
Zagil cast his magic sight to the 5 figures standing in front of the far door. They were black, featureless forms, still cloaked from his sight beneath the runes on their armor. No matter what he did, he would need to deal with the runes first. Suddenly, an overwhelming feeling interrupted his focus, a feeling he knew to be danger. His eyes snapped open to see a gleaming blade descending for him. Zagil snapped his fingers and portals opened on either side of him. The sword, along with the arm swinging it, went into the portal on the Spellweaver's left and came out the right. Zagil closed the portal, severing the arm. The legionary's red eyes went wide and he howled with pain. Zagil took a step back while clapping his hands together in front of him. A shimmering rift opened from within the legionary, splitting him down the middle. The screaming stopped, and the 2 halves fell to the ground. 2 more swords came at him, one stabbing from his right and one swinging in from the left. Zagil vanished, reappearing 10 steps away, his back against a pillar. He breathed out a sigh of relief. He was lucky he hadn't teleported inside the pillar or floor with all the mental interference. In front of him, a section of 7 legionaries closed the hole in their line and charged after him, shields raised. Evidently, they had split off from the group that killed Kotos and pursued him directly. Zagil berated himself for letting his guard down. His eyes rested on the approaching demons, and he placed a hand against the pillar behind him.
Truly, did you think 7 of you?
He paused and glanced down at the pile of gore they stepped over.
8, rather, would be enough to kill me?
The room shook as the enormous pillar slipped into the open rift beneath it. Another portal opened above the first, and the pillar fell, continuously, descending over and over, falling in an endless loop. The legionaries halted their charge, looking from the blur of marble to the Spellweaver standing unfazed just in front of it. The rearmost legionary spun his spear in his hand and reached back. Zagil thrust his hand forward, and the top portal aimed at the invaders. The massive spear of rock shot free of the rift and past the Spellweaver. The legionaries turned to mist as the pillar smashed through them. The pillar carried on straight at Segred, as Zagil had planned. The honor guard wearing red scale armor launched forward and split the pillar in 2 with his great axe, never taking his eyes off the Spellweaver. The 2 halves of stone embedded into the walls beside the Lord, sending up a cloud of dust. Zagil sighed and walked forward. He looked out at the pandemonium before him. Screams and the clanging of metal against chitin echoed through the chamber. As the dust around Segred cleared, Zagil saw more legionaries marching in to reinforce the now beleaguered First Century. Those who remained of the original force surrounded the great Titan. Corpses, reduced to little more than gory mush, lay around Dracaina, piled into a growing mound. Dracaina herself had spears protruding from each of her bleeding legs, as well as her arachnid lower half. She reared back and speared 2 legionaries with her frontmost legs. A wall of spears pierced the chitin of her back, and she staggered forward into the demons ahead of her. 5 more spears pierced her belly as she stomped over the invaders. Blood poured from the wounds. The great beast opened her mouth and roared, letting loose a blast of void energy that she swept across the room. Once more it evaporated on raised shields. Zagil could feel the waning power of the runes as his mind's eye grew clearer.
She will not last much longer, and so our dance draws to a close.
He could not hide his disappointment as he sent the telepathic message.
Matriarch, forgive me. I'll no longer be there to advise you. It is up to you now.
A female voice answered him.
What? Zagil? What do you...
The Spellweaver cut the connection and manifested his gnarled staff. The ancient wood assembled itself, fiber by fiber, until at last the arcane gem blinked back to life at the top. He glanced around himself, and once satisfied he would not be interrupted, closed his once more black eyes and began his chant. The walls echoed his words, and the astral projection turned red. He swept his staff first high over his head, and then low, as though stirring and scooping a thick liquid. And that's exactly what he was doing. Deep within the void, dark power began to churn, rotating against itself, spinning and sparking in agitation. Thunder rippled across the space between dimensions as white-hot lightning shot through the growing clouds of nebulae. Dracaina stopped mid-swing and shivered, looking from the 3 demons she held within her grasp to the glowing Spellweaver. Zagil opened his eyes, and starlight spilled from them. He turned his staff skyward, and reality began to twist. The fabric of space rippled as distant thunder pounded from the other side. One of the honor guards shot from Segred's side, clearing the distance in mere seconds, and leapt for him, great axe raised. Red lightning ripped from the sky. It tore through the air and crashed into the descending demon. Before the runes in his armor could activate, the blast had already thrown him, and he slammed into the wall far to the right of Zagil. The air above them shattered. Chunks of reality fell away as void lightning smashed through the barrier between worlds and fell upon the invaders. Shields rose to defend, and runes burned. The 2 honor guard around Segred shielded him with their armored bodies. Red clouds of nebula descended from the break in reality, and the void storm filled the room with thunder. Lightning continued to spider out, slamming into the formation of shields. Each streak of red light collapsed upon contact, sending feedback into the storm. Only this time, the tear didn't close. Rather, the reversal of energy only made the storm more violent. Blazing solar winds swept down and slammed against all those who stood against the anger of the void. The legionaries' skin blistered from within their armor. The demons who had just entered the atrium burned to ash under the bombardment, completely lacking any form of anti-magic protection. Dracaina shrank back as void lightning crashed down around her. Zagil ignored the torturous pain of his boiling skin and continued to will the storm to turn, pouring more of his power into the vortex. The lightning showered down upon them like rain, and the legionaries began to falter, each thunderous blast bringing them closer to the brick. The runes burned white. The brick beneath their feet began to crack and melt. The legionaries screamed as the runes burned out. Zagil could feel his power ebbing away, and he struggled to keep his burning arms raised. Suddenly, an axe flew at him, tumbling end over end as it sliced through the air. Zagil saw it coming and cast a portal. The axe sliced through it, carvings etched into its glowing blade. Zagil didn't have time to react, and the axe cleaved through his right arm and lodged into the brick behind him. His staff fell to the ground, still grasped by his right hand. Zagil staggered back and fell. He hit the ground hard. The storm calmed, and, with a few last outbursts, faded completely. The tear in the fabric of reality healed its wound. As it did, the Astral Gallery's light, which had burned for centuries, faded out. The remaining legionaries rallied as a second honor guard walked from Segred's side and took command of the disorganized forces. Dracaina looked up at the opening above her, then at the honor guard walking toward her. She raised her scythe and roared out a challenge. In the next moment, her head hit the brick, separated from her body by the swing of a great axe. Her body twitched as it fell. The same honor guard now stood behind her, wiping void black blood from his axe. Zagil watched this from the ground where he lay. He was barely conscious. His whole body felt numb. He saw past memories, the time before, when House Perpetuum was the greatest of all. He saw when they assisted House Diabolos in uniting the realm. And he saw when they were betrayed by the Demon King they put on the throne. Zagil slowly lifted himself up. His one charred arm shook under the strain as he got back to his feet. All eyes turned to the lone demon.
I am Zagil,
he whispered. Blood dripped from the stump of his right arm as his heart pounded with effort.
I am not dead yet.
The astral projection flared back to life, growing brighter and brighter until the room glowed with power. He stood up straight, his eyes ablaze with eons of fury, and, voice bolstered with magic, he declared,
I am Zagil, the Void Spinner, Spellweaver of House Perpetuum. Let us greet death together.
Zagil reached forth, hand extended toward the fallen Dracaina, fingers splayed out. Energy sparked around the beast. The closest to Honor Guard ran for him.
Collapse,
He whispered, and closed his hand. The Void Titan, a being of condensed void energy, began to shake and twist as the singularity deep within her began to pull her apart. The black hole grew larger, and crushing force pulled everything near it in. Legionaries were ripped apart as they fell past the event horizon. Segrid pulled his sword and drove it into the brick, holding himself in place. The Honor Guard with him, and the one who killed Dracaina, did the same with their axes. The last one, however, no longer had his axe in hand, and he was dragged across the atrium, straight toward the black hole. He grasped wildly, but his gauntleted hands found no purchase. His already burnt out runes did nothing as he was pulled into the abyss. Zagil watched as the atrium around him was torn apart, as the astral gallery was pulled into the crushing sphere like the death of a star.
goodbye, my lovely.
He opened his hand, and the orb turned from black to white.
Supernova.